continuing on from the last video, we have Emilie Caspar again. We will ask her the remaining questions. Emily, which areas of the brain are associated with agency and responsibility?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question because most of the time there is not a single brain region that is associated with such subjective experiences. So there are many different brain regions that can be involved depending on the task, depending on the types of decisions. For instance, you have previous studies that found that the sense of agency measured with implicit methods was associated with the motor cortex, for instance. But when I do task myself with moral decision making, for instance, I found more brain regions associated with the medial frontal gyrus. So it may really depends on the decision types. And actually, it's never a single brain region. Most of the time, it's a set of brain regions. And for the sense of responsibility, sometimes they are associated with the same brain regions, but sometimes not. It's very difficult to have an exact and fixed brain network involved in those experiences.
Yeah, from what I read from the book Determined of Robert Sapolsky, the exact same thing that you said, that it's not just one brain region that is associated with most of the tasks that we do. It's an interconnected network. Maybe one
Mhm.
brain region has more part to play, maybe some majority of the part to play, but it still is dependent on other networks as well for the
Mhm.
completion of the whole process. So yeah,
No, indeed.
yeah. Okay, so I heard somewhere that a small thin sheet of neurons called claustrum, which is situated near the insular cortex, has some kind of role to play with consciousness and the sense of self. Have you heard about that? Which areas of the brain region do you think are related to the sense of self? Is it the
Okay.
yeah?
That is a very difficult question. And honestly, this is not fully my field. Sense of self is something that I haven't even investigated specifically because sense of self is very broad. You can have it for different perspectives depending on your body, agency, and other fields. So honestly, I'm not very aware of this literature specifically.
Right.
So I'm not sure I can answer because the whole field of consciousness is vast, and you are very far from knowing actually what brain regions are involved and how in those conscious experiences.
Right, right. I agree. I also want to know which of the brain regions that are activated when we obey orders. And did you find any surprises there? Is it the same kind of brain regions that are associated with the sense of agency?
So it's a complex question because when we obey orders, there are different phases in the decision making process. So first, we have to process the orders that we receive. We have to analyze our environments. So it can be different brain regions, like for instance, auditory processing of the order of the experimenter. Then there is the decision itself. If you decide to obey or disobey, this can be associated with other brain regions, other cognitive processes. And then you can also evaluate the outcomes of your actions for a victim, for instance, and that is also different brain regions. So there is not such a thing that a specific brain regions associated with obedience, for instance. It's really like a dynamical process that that is at play at different moments of the decision making process. But something that was very special for me was to find an effect of obedience on brain regions associated with empathy for the pain of the victim. So, in the paradigm I have created, so agents they can send shocks in exchange for a small monetary reward to a victim, and when they see the shocks being delivered, that activates specific brain regions associated with empathy for pain, notably the insula or the anterior cingulate cortex. And the thing is that in the study, we compare two experimental conditions, one in which they follow orders and one in which they are free to decide. But in both cases, and they know it, the shocks are exactly the same, they are of the same intensity. And yet, we see that when people follow orders, activity in brain regions associated with empathy is reduced compared to when they do the exact same actions but freely. And so it suggests that actually, when we obey orders, we do not really process the pain of the victim as it should be or as it is. Like, if we somehow reduce the perception of empathy we can have for others. And I think this is a crucial finding because it can explain how obedience blurs our morality, because it's like if our brain was like pushing away the pain it actually causes to a victim.
Exactly. So what I think is that it helps them shift the blame on others, and it becomes easier for them to execute that action if they shift in the blame to others. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, that's a mix of processes because they can experience also, as I mentioned, a different moment of the decision making regarding, do they feel responsible when they perform actions, how they evaluate the consequence of the victims, how this influence their subsequent behavior, and so on. But yes, these are parts of the mechanism that I think that explain why people or how people are able to commit atrocities when they follow orders.
right, right. It was insightful. What role do you think tribalism and impulsive decision making and irrationality and confirmation bias, all these phenomena, play in the execution of genocides?
Okay, that's a broad question with many different concepts. Um, there are plenty of psychological effects that are at play during genocide. And it's hard to know exactly all of them because it's very difficult to study actually a genocide when it is ongoing. Most of the studies that we can do, or the studies that I'm doing myself with former genocide perpetrators, it's always after. So we can rely on what they say, but of course we have to realize that it's always after. It's not exactly when this happened, so it's difficult. But the fact that morality is blurred, or morality, for instance, is neutralized, of course, is a big factor. But actually, what is crucial is that there is some academic research that shown that most of the genocides that we know regarding where they happened actually followed somehow a similar patterns regarding social dynamics. So most of the time, genocide starts with a categorization of a part of the population. It can be based on ethnicity, religiosity, whatever. So there is a category, that there is a distinction made between at least two parts of the population. And then following this, you can have processes such as discrimination, dehumanization. And from the literature, we know that all these processes separate people in groups and can create aggressivity, hostility, discriminative behaviors towards another group of the population. And these stages, they systematically happen, sometimes step by step, sometimes at the same time. And then after the humanization process, that's most of the time when extermination starts, actually. And something that I would recommend reading for this is actually the website of Genocide Watch. This is an association that do frequent updates to show all warning on Earth that we have following these different stages, so we can better understand what is at play and what are the commonalities between these different events.
All right, all right. I'll check that out. Do ping me that link, or can I find it on the internet?
On Google, Genocide Watch, and it's a web page, so it's available.
Okay, okay, okay. I'll look it up. All right. So, what percentage of people do you think aligned with the government and defended their own actions when they were committing these inhuman acts, and they were convinced that they were right? So even though they were commanded by the government, they would still claim that they did it of their own free will. And what do you have to say about their psychology?
Yeah, so we don't have any statistics asking them, and them also it depends, because when we say how many people, depends of course which genocide or which one, because there
Hmm.
were more or less potentially people involved. So it's more a percentage of the population. So we don't have those data. We just know from what they say, that the majority of them, they displace their responsibility. Basically, almost none of them ever reported, oh yeah, I was sure of what I was doing and this is what I wanted to do. I have my own responsibility. I think I only met one person who told me that at some point.
Okay.
So it's very infrequent. But regarding the percentage of people who act as perpetrators during genocides, actually, I made recent statistics that are not fully precise because, of course, we can never know exactly how many people participated or rescued others. Many people died, so it's never fully precise. But I tried to make this exercise following the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda and the Nazi genocide. And actually, so it's not the majority of the population, of course, most of the time that accepts to participate in such actions. Statistics can very differ between these events, but something that is striking is that there are actually systematically much more people who take part than those who resist. From the statistics I've made, the maximum I got was more or less 3%, 3.5% of people compared to the number of perpetrators who actually acted as rescuers instead and resisted orders.
So majority of the population are the ones who obey the government and their commands, and only a fringe percent of the population would claim free will and do it of their own will rather than being influenced by the government, and a fringe population would rescue people, right?
Yes. So the majority of the population, most of the time, do not do anything. They are
Yeah,
bystanders. Many are children, too old, women, or whatsoever. So
yeah.
the majority, anyway, is not the perpetrators.
Okay, I mean,
But then
among all the
among
perpetrators, yeah,
among those who took an active part, there are much more perpetrators than rescuers.
right.
But they don't claim about free will because free will is also a concept that may vary between people.
Right.
It's just that they say that they could not help the person in need. I'm not
Okay.
sure if it means that they consider that they had more free will or not. That has never been investigated.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Yeah. I think that would be interesting to know how many percent of people claim free will, or they're doing it of their own will. Regardless of what the government has to say or government influence, even if the government is with them, I mean against them, they would still commit those acts. It would be interesting to know. And like you said, only a fringe percent of the population would rescue the people as well. So yeah,
Mhm.
most of the people are the ones who just fall into the trap of the government, you can say, or the order of the government.
Yeah, appropriate to the hateful propagandas.
Right, right, right. So this reminds me of Paul Bloom's bystander effect, in which we are more likely to help a person in need if if we are alone. The more the people in the circumstance, the more your responsibility subsumes, and you don't take responsibility, and you just watch that happening. Right.
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of studies. The initial researchers were Darley and Latane. They did a lot of studies on the bystander effects, and indeed showed that most of the time, the more people, the less people try to intervene or take time, the more time they take to act. This is a classic effect in the literature, and for instance, in Rwanda, many former perpetrators report that it's not only obedience to authority, it's also an effect of the group. Like they display their responsibility on the group because there were groups of armed militias, so with several people inside that were together killing their victims, their targets, and they displace responsibility on the group. Like the group I was in did it. So to reduce their own involvement. That's very specific and quite classic to observe.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, so the more, so it also reminds me of Peter Singer's pond experiment, uh, thought experiment, in which, so the thought experiment goes like, you're going for an interview, and you have an interview in just 30 minutes or something, and you have to reach that place within 30 minutes, and on the way you find a pond in which a small kid is drowning,
Mm-hmm.
and you have bought very expensive dresses and shoes for the interview, and obviously you have the interview to attend. So if you go and save the child, you won't be able to attend the interview. This is a huge opportunity for you for your career, uh, and if you save the child, you will lose the interview and you will lose the job. And if you don't save the child, obviously the child would die, and you don't even know whether you would be selected in the interview or not. So, so Peter Singer says that most of us would try and save that child, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you apply the same logic, then we have the responsibility to save all those millions in Africa who are dying of starvation or diseases like malaria. What we have to do is that just spend a small percentage of our income or whatever money that we have to charities, effective charities, and they would solve that problem. So
Mm-hmm.
but our what we think or our psychology says that we don't have the same kind of responsibility in those cases as we have in the child drowning case, because that child is right in front of us, but the millions in Africa are like thousands of kilometers away. So uh, but Peter Singer, the conclusion that Peter Singer comes up with is that we have the same responsibility in both the cases, which I don't quite agree with. I think the more causally distant an event, the lesser responsible you are for that event, or you may take for that event. So yeah, what do you think about Peter Singer's
Yeah.
thought on?
For me, it's not really a matter of responsibility. For me, it's more a matter of empathy. Because when you see the child in front of you in danger, you see its distress, so it will activate brain regions associated with empathy. You will feel that, and that will push you to act. If you just receive information by the news, oh, please donate a bit of money to help children in Central Africa, you don't see them in front of you. You sometimes have pictures, but pictures is not the same as seeing a real human being in front of you having issues. And we know that distance reduces empathic reactions. And yes, it may be linked to responsibility, but for me, it's more fundamental processes are, can I feel the distress of the person who is distant or who is right in front of me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you don't agree with Peter Singer then?
But for me, responsibility is difficult to assess here because responsibility is too broad. You
Hmm.
you may feel responsible because you have someone who needs you just in front of you, but you may also consider that people in other countries are the responsibility of their own governments. So it really depends what kinds of responsibility, like or collectivist responsibility or individualistic responsibility. All these questions, it should be better clarified to know exactly the role of responsibility, actually.
Okay. So suppose I'm talking about individualistic responsibility. So what's your response to that? I mean, how much are we responsible? How much should we donate our money to effective charities?
Yeah, but that's something we actually have to decide on our own. That many people, there is also some mistrust most of the time because we give money to a charity. There are a lot of intermediaries. We don't know if the money is going for children or not. So there are also many people who do not give to charities because of these reasons. They would rather give it directly to a children who is in need in front of them
Hmm.
than to an organism that says that they will transfer it to the children. So the fact that there are intermediaries in the decision compared to you giving directly something to help is also different for having our own responsibility involved.
Right, right. So the insecurity regarding that organization may stop you from doing that, isn't it? So
or the fact that there are intermediaries. It's not you yourself giving money to the
yeah,
children. It's via other
other
instances, via
means.
other
It's
people,
very
other means, or
indirect. It has to go
so
through a
it
lot
removes
of
also your
processes.
own involvement and responsibility for this.
Hmm. So if there are a lot of processes, it has to go through. The effect of the empathy just reduces in our mind itself. So uh,
So yeah, of course, as mentioned, it's a decision-making process is very complex. There are always plenty of different elements.
exactly.
Responsibility could be one of them. I think that also empathy that you can feel towards a person because it's in front of you also plays a big role. And there are for sure other processes that are at play, like your past experiences, your education, your moral values, and so on. So it's never a single process. It's too reductionist, actually.
Right. I agree with that. Uh, what do you think are the implications and applications of your study for the future, like regarding robots and all? You had a section in which talk about robots and the future ethics of human
Mhm.
society. Yeah, talk us a bit through that.
Yeah, so these are not my main focus of research. For me, it's more like a general thing that you have to keep in mind that, for instance, it's very preliminary lines of research, but since we know that when there are other human beings, we tend to displace our responsibility towards those other persons. There is also the question of when we ask robots to execute actions for us, because, for instance, during a war, there are more and more robotic intermediaries that are at play, such as drones.
Hmm.
It's less and less that it's a battlefield like that. It's more like we use drones, we use bombs, we use, yeah, mechanistic means. And I think it's a critical further line of research to know to what extent you can also diffuse your responsibility because you use those means, or if on the contrary, using those means because they do not have consciousness, they don't have their own responsibility, you can somehow regain your own feeling of responsibility when you use those means.
Hmm.
It's not something that I investigated a lot. I did a few studies with this. It's not my main one,
I know.
but I think it's a critical question because in the future there will be more and more, yeah, these
Exactly.
additional mechanistic means in between.
Yeah, I want to do more research on that. I want to think about it a lot and see the implications of this. Yeah, that's an interesting field indeed. Uh, yeah, one thing I missed about bystander effect is that have you ever experienced it yourself in your life? Because I have.
Um, yeah, that's a good question. I try to remember.
Okay.
Huh, yeah. But I just remember, yeah, one example, but we were two. Um, yeah, it's a tricky question because it's also very personal. So perhaps for this one, I'll skip
Okay.
because it's more also related to my own personal life.
All right. You can keep that secret. But yeah, I've experienced it myself. Oh, and just like you said, it's a personal thing as well. Might not want to reveal that right now. Yeah, I understand. But yeah.
But it's more related to the fact that I know what led me to intervene and when and why.
Uh-huh.
But it's more like I know that the process behind is linked to my personal life.
Okay,
So
okay.
that's why.
There's a reverse example that I can share that in which someone was beating someone up, and I intervened and stopped that from happening. When there were like 10 to 20 people standing nearby, I was the one who intervened. So yeah, I bypassed the bystander effect.
That's very good. More people should do it.
Right, right, right. You have something to learn, viewers, from that. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. Another important personal question that I would like to know is that why are some people more resilient to trauma and easily forget traumatic experiences than others?
Okay, that's also a very difficult question to understand, to explain in a brief way.
Yeah.
So the thing is that past literature mostly focus on individuals considered alone, like if they were isolated islands,
Mm-hmm.
an isolated island. And the thing is that there are several studies who show that indeed there are individual differences. There are more people resilient. The reason why exactly it's not very clear, but what more recent studies suggest is that there is a huge importance of the social, your social environments. For instance, they have studies that have shown that if you have social supports, for instance, after a traumatic experience, you are more likely to recover, to reduce post-traumatic stress symptoms. So that's why, for instance, if you have refugees that have to flee from their country, it's better that they are displaced together as a family because they will continue receiving support, while if they're just fleeing on their own, they will be isolated. And so the traumatic experience of having to do that may be stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that at least the social context is very important. But then, of course, there are also other main differences. For instance, accessibility to mental health professionals is something that is very, very rare in some countries. It's not very developed. For instance, when I was in Cambodia, I think there were only a bit more than 70 mental health professionals for the country, or psychiatrists, for countries of millions of inhabitants. That's really not sufficient. So it's also sometimes expensive to go to a mental health professional. So
Mm-hmm.
many people cannot afford it. And then there is also something which is more cultural. Like in many cultures in the world, when you see, when you think, I would need to see like a psychologist or a psychiatrist, you may think that you're crazy, or others may just think that you're crazy because they have these associations that seeing someone for mental well-being is just for crazy people, which is not true, of course. But in many places on Earth, there is still a strong reluctance to really account for the psychological effects of a trauma.
Mm-hmm. So, when I talk about my country, India, there's a lot of aversion towards someone going to a psychiatrist. So, just like you said, that if someone is going to a psychiatrist, he has mental problems, like serious mental problems, he's mad, insane. Uh, that kind of wrong impression about psychiatry should change. And how much is it in Belgium and Europe in general, do you think, the judgment regarding
Yeah,
that?
so it's really more and more accepted. Like it depends a bit more on, yeah, if you grew up in a context where it's something common. But actually, for most people, at least in Belgium, or at least in Brussels, almost all of them admit without any problem that at some point in their life they have been seeing a psychologist, or they are
Hmm.
currently seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist, and it's a problem. It's totally okay because we all acknowledge that it's necessary, but it's not everyone yet. So, but it goes towards a very good direction because, yeah, it's reimbursed, part of it,
Right.
by the social security system and so on. So even the government support it.
Hmm. And it's too bad. It might be improving, the situation might be improving, but it's too bad for now. I think it would be great if it gets to the level of Europe in the next few decades at least. But yeah.
Yeah, but psychological effects, it's always a difficult position because when we think of war, genocides, conflicts, or any sources of traumatic experience, we first think about physical injuries or financial injuries.
Hmm.
We barely consider most of the time the psychological effect because it's not visible, it's
Hmm.
hard to quantify, it's hard to see, it's really in people's minds.
Right.
And I think that's also the reason why there are so many blockages regarding this.
Okay. Hmm. Talking about the first point that you mentioned, the social support that somebody has goes a long way into helping them recover from traumatic experiences. I think that's also crucial. Many people don't have that social support, and emotional and mental
Mhm.
support isn't there, and that's why many people are fall into depression in today's world, right? So I think a lot of work needs to be done there. It's kind of an
Mhm.
underrated subject. Not many people think about it a lot, or at least work on it seriously. But I think it's a very underrated subject. It has to be looked upon, and
Yeah.
I think, especially when it comes to the dating scene, for example, uh, many people end up not having the social support after, say, a breakup or something, and they end up
Mhm.
going into depression. That's especially the case with men. I think I don't know about the data. I think, but I've read somewhere that men suffer from that more than women. Women have the social support even after a breakup to help them move on or get over a traumatic experience. So yeah, I think that's a crucial area there, and especially in the individualistic societies that we live these days in most of the world in
Mhm.
2024. I think it's important. Social support is important. We have to go back to the old days in which wasn't that individualistic; it was collectivistic societies, right? Yeah. Do you have any points to add there?
Yeah, no, clearly. There isn't gender bias regarding this, especially following a breakup. But I think that's also why mental health professionals are so important, because if you can all have access to them, at least you are all equal regarding the support that you can receive from a professional.
Exactly.
The fact that you have a supporting groups of friends or family that helps you, that's very personal. It depends if you have the chance to still have a family, for instance.
Hmm.
It depends on many factors that you cannot always control.
Right, right. And also, again, on gender, do you have any data on gender differences in traumatic stress effects? Is there a huge disparity between men and women? Because it's
So there are some studies who show that women are more likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorders than men.
okay.
But it's not fully clear yet if it's a specificity regarding a gender, or if it's more because it's the types of trauma that they experienced. For instance, during a genocide, during war, for instance, so most of the time it's the men that are on the battlefield, so they are directly in front of the danger.
Hmm.
But in most of these events that happen, that's the women who are actually targeted, because the
Hmm.
women, they are considered as those who are wearing the ethnicity, the culture, and transmitting it through their children.
Hmm.
And so most of the time, women are targeted because they represent all the social aspects of a culture. And so they're killed, they are raped, they are tortured sexually, they're left with lifelong diseases such as VHI.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I missed
Yeah, that
spelling.
happens. It happens with me more.
And so it is reported that perhaps they're more likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorders because they suffer from life experiences that are more likely to trigger those experiences.
Hmm.
So it's not fully clear yet exactly how is that women are more likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorders, but it
Hmm.
can be due to these aspects.
Okay, okay. Insightful. Okay. Uh, Another broad question. How do you think we can prevent genocides in the future? And how important is self-criticism, critical thinking,
Mm,
self-reflection in avoiding conflicts?
yeah. I wish I would have the Nobel Prize for Peace if I can answer that question one
Right.
day. I don't know. I don't know. What
But
I'm trying to do at the
from
moment,
your experience, whatever you can share from the studies that
yeah,
you did.
something that I'm trying to do at the moment to try to bring more answers to that question is to focus on the rescuers. So the very few people who resisted propagandas and orders and everything to
Hmm.
actually save people. So there is an interesting data because a couple of months ago I was in Rwanda to collect the stories and information from genocide rescuers.
Hmm.
And we interviewed 64 of them and asked them how many people they had helped save. And they reported that together, these 64 people, it was actually more than 900 people that they helped save at that moment. So it's huge when you consider how a small number of people can save so many people later on. And for me, those statistics shows that if more people acted like them, for sure, the death toll of human conflicts would be lower, and also perhaps some authoritarian regimes would not have succeeded. If more people resist, they don't have participation, and they cannot do anything with a few people in the governments. So it's also they receive support from the population that these atrocities can happen. So I think now I've shifted a bit my focus not on the perpetrators themselves, but more on these very few individuals who instead risk their life to save others.
Right, right.
Because I think that if we can learn what distinguishes them from others, then perhaps we can try to develop interventions that would help more people to act like this, and as a ripple effect to start preventing these atrocities in the future.
Correct.
And I think for that, indeed, self-criticism is very important. The fact that first being aware that obeying orders or integral biases affects so much how your brain processes information, even if you are not really aware of this, is already a first part to realize, okay, perhaps here, if I'm doing it, perhaps I will not feel responsible, but am I really not responsible? And I think that when you know the mechanism and the processes that influence your decision-making process, that can also perhaps help people to take more time to reflect on what they are actually doing, and perhaps let them time to perhaps make another decision.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a clever move, like to focus on the rescuers rather than the perpetrators. It reminds me of survivor bias. So rather than focusing on the ones that succeed, for example,
Mm-hmm.
suppose someone succeeds in a very difficult examination, you might have more information to gain from the ones who fail in that examination because all circumstances and all events were in favor of the ones who succeeded. So they
Mm-hmm.
might not be exactly able to say why they succeeded because a lot of luck factors might be involved and it just played into his success. But there will be a lot of information to gain from the ones who didn't succeed and the ones who failed. But mostly our first impulse goes towards the ones who succeed and ask them for their experience. Just like that, I think it's a clever move to learn from the rescuers more than the bystanders. We will have a lot to know from the rescuers. So I think that's a
Yeah,
clever move. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, we'll see. I'll see with the results, and I mean, it's just the beginning of
Hmm.
years of research. But yeah, hopefully we'll get some critical answers.
Sure. I'm looking forward to it. Okay. Any message that you have for our viewers? Um,
Yeah, I think for me, like by writing this book and showing the examples and reflect on the social dynamics and how they can influence every one of us actually to make those decisions and to perhaps participate in regimes that we should not accept. I think it's part of a general idea of making people more self-conscious of their vulnerabilities regarding so many different influences.
mhm.
And so yeah, I just want to show that actually it's somehow normal to, I mean, it's very common to fall prey to these social dynamics,
Mhm.
but why it's so exceptional that some people choose the other path. And I think it's good to show that in the end we always somehow have a choice. We can always, it's a decision that we have to make and live with ourselves.
Right.
So I think it's good to also show the stories of those who rescued others to show that actually another path is possible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like a superhero kind of a figure, we can idolize those people and learn from them, isn't it?
Yeah, but they don't have superpowers. They are just ordinary people,
Exactly.
very ordinary, but they choose the other path.
So maybe when we teach our kids, we can do it via these kind of stories like Superman or something.
Yeah,
But
perhaps.
yeah, we have to start teaching it from childhood itself, isn't it? Rather than
I
waiting
think
for
so. I haven't
adulthood.
tested this yet, but I think it's very important that education has a big role, I think, into this.
Right, it's very important. I think a lot of moral education has to be incorporated into schools, uh, right,
Mhm.
right from the very young age itself. It has to be
Mhm.
incorporated. I think that's also underrated. Not many schools focus on it a lot, but I
Mhm.
think it's important. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Okay.
I was thinking about something. Kind of missed it. Yeah.
Okay. I don't really have much more time, so it
Okay.
depends if it's very short.
I'll just have do you have 5 more minutes?
Uh, I will be slightly late, so it
Okay.
really have to be short 5 minutes because I have
Okay,
another
okay.
meeting
So,
in one.
okay, cool, cool. The last question is, um, what do you think is the meaning and purpose of life? What are your meaning, purpose, goals, and ambitions for life? And where do you want to see the world in the next 30 to 50 years?
Yeah.
That's a big one.
I clearly want to see the world stopping making wars, splitting people between different groups. I just hope that at some point we will all see ourselves as same people. It doesn't matter the skin color, the age, the education, the background, the ethnicity whatsoever. We are just the same species. We share Earth with other species, animal species, and we just have to learn to live in peace. I think that's critical because if we want to approach the global real challenges that will be next, like water or climate change and so on, we have to first learn to live in peace. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster.
Hmm.
So yeah, for me, my perspective is that if I can somehow help in a way or in another by making more people willing to make peace and to stop regimes to make war, that's already something I would be happy with for my own life and for the time that I have on Earth.
Right. I mirror all those views that you have. Yeah. Thank you so much, Emily, for coming on to the show once again. I know you don't have much time, otherwise, we could speak for a lot more time. I have a lot more to discuss with you. But yeah, sometime
Yeah,
in the future, maybe. Yeah. Keep in
yeah,
touch.
indeed.
Thank you for
Thank you
calling.
very much for your invitation.
Yeah. Pleasure having you here. Thank you. All right. So, yeah, that was amazing. Uh, I don't know whether you've listened to Christopher Hitchens talk about responsibilities we have as a human agency in this society. There's one dialogue I will leave you with. Resist it while you can. Stay tuned and stay curious.